of the presenter at different times during the presentation. After the presentation is done today, you will be receiving an email with a copy of the PowerPoint slides, the presentation recording, and any other resources that we discussed. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Victoria Ibanez, the Executive Director of Redwind Consulting, who will be facilitating this discussion.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Just to tell you a little bit about myself. So Victoria Ibanez, I am Navajo, Hickory, Apache, and Mexican descent. And I'm the Executive Director of Redwind Consulting. And we are a national tribal technical assistance provider working with the Office on Violence Against Women. And we also have a project through a partnership with Cornell University that is funded through the Office for Victims of Crime. Our largest project is our grants to tribal governments. We are the comprehensive TA provider on that. And then I myself have been working on addressing domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking over the past, I want to say 38 years. And I have been working on providing national tribal technical assistance over the last 25 years. So way back when the beginning of the Office on Violence Against Women started and TA started. So sometimes when I say that out loud, it makes me feel really old. But in the process, before that, what laid some of the foundation for me to do the work that I do today. I was formerly the Executive Director of American Indian Community Housing Organization and was one of the founders of that organization. And prior to that, I worked at a mainstream organization called Women's Transitional Housing, where when I left, I was a co-director of that organization as well. I came into this work as somebody who was seeking, actually, I started because I was seeking a protection order for myself. And shortly after I got my protection order, I started volunteering as a legal advocate in Duluth, Minnesota. So it's been a long journey over the years. And in that process, ended up in positions where I started having to look at budgets and actually later starting to write budgets, which has been a journey in itself for me. So I'm going to spend some time over the time we have together talking about how you're telling your story through your budget. So when I think about budgets, oftentimes a lot of people look at them and think about them as numbers. I think about them as that when I look at a budget, I can see an entire project in there. I can see the things that we're supposed to do, kind of the scale of what we're doing. And I'm hoping that through the time together that we have, that we'll be able to, explore some of those different ways that we describe our projects and tell our story through our budget. But I would like us to do what we call a Mentimeter. And well, first, let me get to the OVW disclaimer. So this project is supported by grant number 15JOVW-21-GK-02212-MUMU. It's awarded through the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinion, findings, and conclusions and recommendations expressed in this webinar are those of the presenter and not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. I've already introduced myself, so I'm going to just skip that. So I want us to do a Mentimeter. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Mentimeter, is that it's going to create a word cloud. So I want you to think about 1 to 2 words that describe the feelings that you experience when you think about writing a budget. So I'm going to reshare a different slide or a different image to allow you to participate. So you can look on this particular screen now, and at the very top, you go to www.menti.com and you use the code 42450677, and it will allow you to, when you enter that code in, then you can enter the words that describe the feelings that you experience when you think about writing a budget. So the code and the website is now in the chat. So go ahead and make your entries, and then what it will do is, as words start to show up, you'll be able to start seeing a word cloud formulate. So here we go. First one, nervous. People feel nervous when you think about writing a budget. Overwhelmed. I love that somebody put in here responsible. I mean, it's a huge responsibility. And if you leave something out, what ends up happening is you don't have the funding later. Intimidated, complex, panic, stressed. So feeling, you're feeling some anxiety about it. It is a huge responsibility when you write your budget. And the more you get opportunities to write budget, the more that anxiety will settle down for you. I love that somebody put in here hope and exciting, because when we think about writing a budget, if we're fortunate to get funded for the full amount we ask for, or some of what we ask for, it gives us the ability to do something within our communities. It's going to enhance some of our work. So it really gives us opportunity. Transparent. So being able, when you look at a budget, when I look at a budget, I actually can see a project in there. So the transparency of it, when I first started learning how to work on budgets, my coworker and I would sit down and we would talk about that stuff, and we would talk about it with other program staff so that we made sure we got input to help shape and define what we were doing as well. Complex, detailed. So it is a lot of detail. And for those of you working with OVW, you write your budget and then you have to also put it in Just Grants into a system, and so there's all these attention to details. And so for me, writing a budget is not something that I write in an afternoon. I might do a first draft in an afternoon or a beginning draft in an afternoon, but it really is a process of writing that budget to make sure we've got the different details in there, the different attention to what we need, making sure we've got all of the pieces that need to be funded, where we're spending money, that it's covered and it's covered with enough detail. Someone says, don't want to do it. I remember when I was first asked to write a budget, it totally freaked me out and I didn't want to do it. I went home and I felt like, why am I even doing this job? I can't do it. Why, it felt so huge and overwhelming, and I really didn't want to do it. And it felt painful at first. But the more I got closer to it, and my coworker who was working with me on it, she guided me through it. So she really helped me to see pieces in there and helped me to understand how to build it. So I just want to thank you that this word cloud is really fun to watch it grow and to see the different pieces in here. Self-doubt is another big one in here. Not sure that we can pull it off. Can also be huge, thinking about it. Time consuming. It's an opportunity also. And then at the same time, it can be exhausting. So we can actually take this word cloud and we can turn it into a PDF and share it with folks. So I'm going to shift my sharing back to the PowerPoint. And thank you for doing that word cloud. I see some more still coming in. And I just want to say that exciting is the largest word on there. So more people, it mixed with all that mix of emotions, also saw it as exciting. So actually that's exciting for me. So when I think about the budget, actually, fortunately, with the way I was taught to think about budgets is to really think about what do we want to accomplish and try to imagine what are we trying to do with the funding that we're applying for. And many people start by having their narrative all written out. And when you look at your narrative, your grant narrative, and the things that you say that you're going to do, then you should be able to start thinking about them, like, what is that going to cost to do that? So, and, actually, I've been reading a lot of budgets lately. And as I'm talking with people, just really thinking that if for them to like imagine the possibilities. Sometimes when we have this kind of nervousness and this anxiety about budgets, we actually edit ourselves down and we're afraid to ask for money. So, so think about OVW and some of the grants because it's federal funding. It's, might have a threshold that they'll fund up to, 300,000, 500,000, or even higher, depending on the kind of grant you're applying for. And people, start thinking about it and they start, imagining it, and they might imagine like $150,000 worth of costs. And so they've already limited their thinking because of some of the nervousness and anxiety that people have. And then sometimes it's the way we've been taught to think about money, and the way we've been raised. So for myself, as a part of leaving an abusive relationship, I lived in poverty for some years. And as a part of it, I had to think about the most narrowest way to manage money. And we transfer those emotions and ways of thinking into the way we look at a budget organizationally or programmatically. So when we think about working on the budget and telling our story, we want to try and pull back those hard feelings and imagine and dream of the possibilities. And I always tell people, dream big. What do you really want to do? If it was an ideal picture of what your program would look like, what would it look like? And start brainstorming some of what that might look like. So you've already written some narrative, and then think about how do we make sure that this narrative has the actual complete resources that it needs to be able to implement this project. Also, when you think about budgets, when we think about, feeling kind of a little bit freaked out over the fact that I've got to write this whole detailed budgets, you can borrow people's budgets. So when I became the director of American Indian Community Housing Organization, it was the first time I was the lead person responsible for doing all of our fundraising. And I would get ready, I'd see a solicitation come out and I'd get ready to work on it. And my coworker from my former organization, she told me, she says, if you need to, you can ask any of your sister organizations in the community or people that and see if they'd share their budget. And sometimes they'll share the budget in its entirety. Sometimes they edit down the personnel because they don't want you to see wages, different kind of things like that. But borrow budgets, ask people to provide them to you. LVW has some sample budgets also that they have on their website. Those are there and they're good for starting points and stuff to look at structure and stuff like that. But I also like to look at what people are putting in their budgets. So like if I'm providing a program that's responding to survivors in my culturally specific community, I want to find another culturally specific organization that's doing similar work that's willing to share samples of that. And then when we're looking at the budgets, we want to ask in our budget for what we need. and don't start from a place of self-editing. And one of the things that I see frequently is that people don't ask for the cultural supplies that we need. So for myself as an Indigenous person, I always build in cultural supplies within our budget, and it's not mixed within my budget that has my office supplies in it. I make a line item just on cultural supplies so I can be very detailed and provide information about what specific cultural needs we have. So for instance, we're getting ready to buy blankets, which is very cultural for us for us as Indigenous people, and it's in my budget. We have multiple different things, and I'm actually working on a conference request form right now. And in my other category, I have a line item in there in my conference request form for my cultural supplies. So I'm budgeting it in big ways for my operating budget, for my programmatic budget, and then specific for conferences and other types of things like that. So when we think about budget, we really want to be able to start seeing all of the pieces, and it's not something that's going to happen at once. So for me, when I know that I want to apply for a certain project, I start drafting, like I might outline what are my key activities, and then corresponding to it is like, then what do I need for my key activities? And so I'm a big one for creating worksheets, you know, different kinds of things where I've drafted, here's my activities, and I might have a column of activities and then a column of, you know, where it shows different kinds of, like, for this activity, we need this, we need supplies. So I'm doing cultural activities in an education group. So I might want to help it within education groups. We might want to work on hand drums. We might want to make ribbon skirts. We might want to teach beading stitches or do basketry. So then I want to think about, you know, how much, what kind of supplies do I need for that to pull that off? I might need a couple sewing machines. I need fabric, I need thread, I need, you know, fabric rulers that are clear so you can see the fabric. You know, I need threads, I need bobbins. I mean, so it's not just I need fabric and sewing machines. There's all those little other details that fall into it. So when I create charts like that, I usually create a table. So the table, one column with different cells that move down will be the activities. And then the second column will be what do I need? And the third column will be random notes of other kinds of stuff, because as I'm brainstorming that, I might think of great language. I might think of other kinds of things that I want, that's important for me to have to describe. So we need to really make sure everything that we need for the budget, ranging from what do we need, you know, like I was talking to someone the other day and I was saying, you're developing a new program, so look around your office. What does this new staff need? You know, and I said, you're sitting in a chair. You know, that new staff needs a chair. That new staff needs a desk. That new staff needs a lamp. They need a telephone. You know, look around your office. What do they need? And start brainstorming those kinds of details. So when we think about getting started and thinking about what our project needs to accomplish its activities, we want to break that down into different steps, because it's more than the supplies, it's more than a staff person. So we want to think real comprehensively about it. So what is your project? What kind of personnel and staffing do we need? And this, when I think about personnel and staffing, one of the things that I see when I review budgets is there's two main things that happen in staff, three things actually. Three things that happen in staffing is, one is they really underestimate the amount of hours that it takes to do things. So when they put in place staffing, oftentimes I look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, they've got one staff at 32 hours and they're going to do all this stuff. This really should be maybe 1.5 FTE. So 1.5 for me is a full FTE is 40 hours. So 1.5 would be 60 hours of time per week. So that's could be 1.5 staff people or 2 staff people split working 30 hours, depending on how it's looked, as opposed to one person with half that time. The other common issue that I see happen with personnel is that then the wages are so low. So you really want to look at what's realistic for the wages in your area. You know, an urban center, your wages are going to be much higher than they're going to be in a real rural area, but really don't undercut your wages. You can look at other sister organizations, other similar organizations doing kind of similar work, and ask them, can you just tell me some of what your wage structure is? And get that idea so that you can begin to think about what's going to be reasonable for a starting wage for this person. Because we want to make sure we build in wages that are going to be able to support that person so that we have stability in that position. Because if the wages are too low, that person is going to take the first opportunity to get a better job. Then the third category that I see that's undercut when we think of personnel are the benefits. When we think about employee benefits, some of them, and it depends on how you write your budgets, but when you look at, are you having them pay for their medical insurance? Are you paying for for their medical insurance? What kind of benefits are you including in there for that employee? So the more we can build that in there and care for the basic needs of our employee, and the basic needs, but also the living needs of that employee. So we want to move them from survival in their job to being able to be comfortable enough to be able to focus on the work. So personnel and staffing is such a critical area when you build that out. And it's also going to be your most expensive line item. So really think carefully about that and make sure you have enough time to cover what you need to do. Better to remove some of the activities a little bit or lower the quantity of your activities to make sure your staff isn't going to get burnt out. So we talk about trauma-informed work with survivors. We need to work in a way that's trauma-informed with our staff and our coworkers. For us within our Native communities, we talk a lot about our relatives. And when we think about trauma-informed, we also talk about being relative-centered. And so when I think about working with my sister or my auntie or, you know, my relatives, I want to make sure I do good by them. So you do that in dollars and cents in your personnel budget. And then you want to think about, so maybe there's parts of your job, of the jobs that need to be done that aren't enough to carry a full position. So it's something where it may end up being like 100 hours a year or 20 hours a year or whatever. So those can be partners and contractors that you build in, and you want to think about them as well. And make sure that you have the right people doing what you need. Culturally specific, when I think about my partners and contractors, so like my staff, our lead staff and our staff that have contact with the programs we work with are all Native people. And then when we think about our partners and contractors, we try to do that as well with the people that we hire there. If we're bringing in culturally specific work, of course, that contractor needs to be, for us, it would be an Indigenous person that would be leading culturally specific work. And then what kind of travel is needed? Travel for us as staff, travel for contractors, travel to conduct the different activities of the project, and then travel to conduct the operations of our project. So for instance, here at Redwin, our financial manager runs and checks our mail at our mailbox, which is at a UPS store. He, does our shipping for us. He has to run, and do different kinds of errands. So we have to have mileage in not just for running education groups or holding a training or doing different kinds of things like that, or doing accompaniment with a survivor, we need to have it for operations as well. So we want to think about that travel based on what do we need for the program to accomplish what they're trying to do, for the contractors to accomplish what they need to do, and for our operations to be managed. And then what else do we need? You know, we need internet. We need if you're doing virtual stuff, you need a Zoom account. Depending on how much you've got going on, you might need a couple Zoom accounts. You might need, if you're going to do anything with survivors, you may need a more expensive Zoom account that's got protections for privacy on there. So you want to think about, so what else? Culture supplies. What do you need to do to conduct cultural activities? And actually, we just completed a booklet for our grantees. It's called Centering Cultural Practices. And for us, that's a printing budget. So we have our printer costs and our in-house printing that we do with regular, like I'm sitting here with stacks of paper on my desk. And then we're going to distribute this. So we have different kinds of costs with this to be able to print and distribute these materials. And so there's all sorts of different things we're going to think about. And then if you're serving survivors directly, then you're going to think about, what do the survivors need? So, thinking about things such as, the cultural supplies, you're going to provide them individually and directly. Financial assistance, maybe hotel night stays, maybe, transportation to look for jobs, or childcare to go to court, or to meet with a therapist, or to go to a healing activity or healing ceremony or something like that. So you want to think about all of the different aspects of your program and make sure you've got enough resources in there. And of course, there are limits to budgets, but I often think about people first time doing budgets when the grantor says we can provide $300,000, and then I'm reviewing a project and they ask for $140,000. Part of it for me, often I will look at the budget and it was like, if this is bare bones that they asked for. So we want to make sure we aren't asking for skeleton budgets. We want to put meat on that. We want it to be a living budget that can serve our programs. So your project, that envisioning, when I think about working with, our culturally specific programs, we need to be able to dream. So envisioning our project is part of that dreaming. And I always say, start with the ideal and the dream, the biggest dream possible. And then then as you're looking at your budget, you think about, oh, we want to do 5 different big things. Then as we're thinking about the project, then we want to also think about, what can we realistically do? So we might have a 2-year grant that we're applying for, or a 3-year grant. What can we realistically accomplish in 2 or 3 years? Do we do all of this in all these 5 activities in the 3-year budget? Or do we do 2 or 3 of them and then think about how we are going to grow? Because sorry about that. That's me talking with my hands. And so as we're thinking about that, we want to make sure we don't take on too big of a bite of activities, because we don't want to don't want to end up in a situation where we say we're overwhelmed, we can't accomplish it. So how we think and plan our project is critical for how we're going to think and plan our budgets. So going back to personnel, so I pulled a few examples and just threw some stuff together. So thinking about how many staff do we need? So when we think about staff, a lot of times people like, so this has a new advocate in here, and that's the largest position. So if we think about the positions, we have to think about not only the person who's going to do the work, but who's going to supervise that person. And so in this little sample here, you've got a project coordinator in here that's going to do supervision and may also help do planning and laying out some of the foundation of the work. So they're at least going to do oversight and supervision, and at 8 hours a week, most likely they're going to take on and, do a little bit more than that. And then project support. So I've been talking with some grantees lately about project support. It's like people build in this stuff, and then you've got your higher paid staff sitting there folding brochures or stapling packet and making packets. And project support can really help with that kind of stuff. I see that my screen's not being shared. Sorry about that. When I bumped it with my finger, it just stopped. So anyway, so when you think about project support, they're going to do the stuff that doesn't require skill or much training to do that. So we have project support staff here at Redwin, and they take notes in meetings for us. They'll prepare packets. Like I'm going on a site visit in 2 weeks, and I have a list of materials that I need, and they'll put my packets together for me to send me out the door. So they're going to help assist. They're not going to lead and do the full core of the work. And then, while in this sample I have up here, I have a bookkeeper listed. This is probably a bookkeeper / financial manager, based on the way this is laid out, the number of hours. So when we look at the column in here, hours per project, you can see how much time is being spent. So the person that's doing the bookkeeping, their regular work is 40 hours a week, but they're only putting in 2 hours in this project. So they're basically, they're entering information into the bookkeeping system, and they're writing checks, and they're probably pulling data for financial reports, and or maybe doing the financial reports with that amount of money. And they most likely are carried in other grants as well. And then narrative is important to describe your budget, what you're doing. So when you look at this, that it's got employee benefits at 33% of cost of salaries. So it's got 8% for FICA. So that's the Social Security, the federal employer tax that's required, and Medicare. And then there's 3% for unemployment and workers' compensation. And that's going to vary by organization, what the unemployment and workers' comp rates are.
Something and okay, but and then it says that.
I'm hearing some talking going on. Just wanted to say that. And then also there's family medical leave insurance. So here in the state of Colorado, we just had a law passed, and starting January 1, we started deducting family medical leave insurance from employers' wages or employee wages. And so that's what that 8% is. So it creates a really nice fund for paying for family medical leave for all employees, which I think is really phenomenal. And then our health insurance, we pay, this says single coverage, but at Redwin, we pay family coverage. And we pay a health savings account, a health reimbursement account, plus dental and vision insurance for all of our staff. And then we have an end of year compensation that we pay staff as a benefit. It is not a bonus, but it is a check that we will provide people additional money at the end of the year. So we usually pay it around Thanksgiving for folks. So then when you think about partners and contractors, so different kinds of things would be facilitating meetings, developing products, cultural activities, facilitating cultural healing. And one of the things when you think about, so what do you pay them? And that's been a big discussion that's been going on for a long time, because when you think about the activities, so you can look at somebody who maybe they're working at Indian education through the school system, and they're going to facilitate some cultural healing work, but their work at Indian education program in the school district, they're getting paid maybe $26 an hour at Indian education. But they're coming to do cultural healing work, and OVW basically says you have to do a rate determination to look at what their rate is to do similar work. Well, they may provide information from Indian education, but that's not similar work. So we at Redwin, we have set a base level rate to provide contractors, but when I'm budgeting and I don't have that base level, I will put them in at a higher rate, and then I'll do the rate determination later if I don't have a specific contractor listed. So say I've got Sally Jones, who is going to do the cultural healing, and I know it in advance. So then I would ask her for the rate. What's the rate for contracting? And if their rate is too low, I'll put our base rate in the budget. And if I don't know that I'm going to contract with Sally Jones, and I just say I'm going to hire one contractor to do this kind of cultural healing activity, then I'll do a rate determination when we get ready to hire them to determine their rate. But my budget may have the federal rate. So which OVW, which the federal agencies, the federal rate is $650 a day, or $81.25 an hour. And so I'll do that. And then if I have an MOU partner, I will do rate determination with them when I'm building that relationship for a part of my grant, so that when I'm writing my budget, I will actually have their rates already so that I can build that in there. And then if you don't know who you're looking for and you're doing a hiring for somebody, then you have to have a procurement policy in place. And that's a whole other training. But oftentimes, based on your procurement policy, if you're hiring somebody, if your policy says that for anything you purchase over $5,000 has to have bids done, and you're hiring somebody to do a job that's only like $1,000, you can hire somebody who's qualified without doing a bid. So that's why that procurement policy is important in there. So right now we're actually going to do a small documentary, and because the costs are going to run about $20,000 for the documentary, we have to get 3 bids on that. So then you think about travel. So the people that travel, it's your staff, your employees that travel, your partners and contractors that travel. And so when you think about, is travel needed for the project, you want to make sure that you put in place in your budget, if your grant says there's required travel set aside, you put that in there. So they might say there's a required $15,000 budget amount for OVW approved activities. So you have to put that whole amount in there. That doesn't mean you can spend it on other training activities or other kind of travel. You have to put that entire line item in there for that OVW travel set aside. But you can also say, I want to send this staff or my staff to a training for the National Sexual Assault Conference. So I can put a line item in there for a conference for the National Sexual Assault Conference and put the travel in there, and the registration fee you'd put in a different category. So you want to think about your travel in a different way, not just the required OVW. And then if you're doing, activities where you have to go to a different meeting space for it, then that's outside of your regular location. So those staff and those contractors will be paid to travel to that. So you want to think about what's your mileage rate Red Wind always uses the GSA rate so that, if that mileage rate changes for the, on the federal level, then it changes for us, but we use the current GSA rate. And then air travel, if we're using air travel, people are traveling into Colorado Springs to do the work on air travel, then I think about where might they be coming from, and I check a couple flights, but I check it out 30 days in advance. I don't check it out and look like, oh, we want to do it in August, and I'm going to do a search on it sitting here in February for August, because you're going to have a skewed rate at that distance. And then your ground travel, taxi, shuttle, and ground mileage. So all of that kind of travel stuff, you need to provide details on that. So a big piece in there is that as you're doing specifics, you want to make sure how many people are traveling to this conference, how many plane tickets am I needing at this rate? How many nights of lodging am I needing? How many days of meal per diem am I needing? And how much ground travel am I needing? So it needs to be specific. So I'm going to just pause here to see if there's any questions based on anything I've talked about so far. Erica.
Hi, I had a lot of questions, obviously. In the chat, I was just posting them so I didn't forget. On the slide where you talked about the project support and those amounts and the fringe benefits narrative, it was listed year-end compensation.
Mm-hmm.
Around how much do you think is appropriate, or the general rate to allocate for that? Someone suggested to me $500.
We pay more for our year-end compensation. So this last year, depending on the staff, like if they'd been, how long they've been at Red Wind, like if they were in their first year at Red Wind or within the first 3 years or longer, then we did 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000 for our end of year. And so when I think about it for my budget, when I look at that, had all that percentage run for that 14% for our employee insurance and all of that, I try to think about it in terms of a percentage. So like if I look at that year-end compensation in the scheme of the cost of it, then I'll come up with and add that to a percentage, which in the scheme of things, it generally runs around 1%, 1.5%.
Okay. And then when you mentioned the project support, are we folding that in to specific roles and giving additional allocation of hours to accommodate for that? Or is that a separate title?
And so that's up to the project. So you may think about what you're trying to accomplish and what other kind of things are going on within your organization and stuff. So there might be a benefit to do a project support position. So for me, when we started doing project support, I had to think about it for a little while because I don't want to hire somebody for 8 or 10 or 15 hours a week. I want to make sure that they've got, something. Usually when I hire somebody, they have from Red Wind, personally, I want them to have minimum 24 hours so we can pay them, provide them employee benefits based on laws and stuff. And I don't know if it's Colorado laws or federal laws or what, but you have to have 24 hours to be able to have to have an employee covered under insurance and stuff. So, so for me to have a position where they've got 8 hours, then I want to make sure that I've got them under a couple other grants. So they've got at least 24 hours, if not more. And then if you don't have that ability to hire somebody to get them with their employee benefits, which that's important for me for, when we talk about how we respect our staff to support them. So, and also protects the organization from turnover. then you would think about rolling it into other positions to do some of that kind of work. So if you can't do that separate, then you've got 32 hours on the advocate. Maybe the advocate's going to do that. Maybe if your finance doesn't have full hours, maybe finance will provide some assistance. Your bookkeeper might provide some assistance. I hope that helps. Any other questions?
There's a question in the chat, Vicky, from Lang. It says year-end compensation. Is language important? Because I know some grants won't do a quote unquote bonus.
Absolutely, language is important. So year-end compensation, you know, if we were a corporation, it might be a bonus, but we are basically compensating our staff. We're building it into our budget, and it's small enough to where we can't carry it across our hours. So we're just putting it here, and we're going to give it to them at the end of the year. So I don't belabor that language in my narrative. So you saw in that particular one where I did, you know, and end of year compensation is the way I have it in there, and it has passed. We've been doing it for probably, well, Redwind started in 2005, so I think we started at about 2008. And so it has cleared all of the OVW budgets. So I always roll it into this part right in here, that last string where it's at right after the medical leave insurance and 14%. And then that's that string that 14% covers. And it's not a straight, I don't do that 14%. Like I don't do like one employee who's younger, like my health insurance is the most expensive because I'm 66 years old. And then we have staff who are in their 30s and 40s and actually a few in their 20s. And so their insurance is going to be way cheaper. So what I try to figure out is an average across those costs. And I charge the same in my budget. And then when we charge it to our budget, the actual charging, then we charge actual per employee and stuff. But yeah, really watch that language. Never call it a bonus. Never, 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 ever, anywhere. End of year compensation. We even, when we do our paychecks, we actually put it in there. It's called end of year compensation. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. So then you really want to think about what else. So anything that is a cost, you want to make sure that you estimate it. Better to have a line item and not use it than to not have the line item in there. And the reason B is once your budget is cleared and you start working on it, and then later you go like, geez, we have $3,000 for this activity, and you know, for the supplies for whatever, you know, in here, and we're not going to spend it. We've completed all of our activities that were in our grant, but we're not spending it. That's not a big deal, because the budget itself with OVW, and I speak mostly about OVW funding, but many grantors will have some level of flex. So between your line items, you can move different amounts. Some will say 5% between line items. OVW says you can move 10% around in your budget without having to get a budget approval. So if you don't spend that small amount in the scheme of the bigger budget, it's not a big deal. But if you didn't put it in there, you then have to go back to OVW and do a budget modification, which is a lot of work. So better to put it in there and not use it than to not have it at all. And then, you know, like think about like-minded stuff. So I will do like financial assistance. I'll do a line item in my other cost category in the OVW budget. And I have a financial assistance in there, but subcategories, I'll put childcare, I'll put, you know, like our advocate program operates transitional housing. So then we do rent in there. We have relocation expenses in there. And then we have financial assistance to victims, which is for removing barriers. So we have multiple, and then there's other stuff in there, like transportation and groceries, you know, and then the financial assistance to remove barriers will include clothing and toiletries and other kind of stuff, as well as like paying to get birth certificates and paying other kind of fees and stuff. So really think specifically about what you need and then break that down. So if you're going to serve, like our advocate program serves 80 victims in a year, but we only serve 7 in our transitional housing in a year. And so I want to think about childcare in a way of, not that I'm going to serve, you know, 40 victims with childcare. I break childcare down to instances of childcare because it's easier to do that. So maybe I end up serving 12 with childcare. But I, you know, spent all of my childcare budget and maybe a little bit more that I pulled from another cost category to cover for it. So really think about the specifics. OVW wants to see, to be able to look at that amount that you put in there, and your narrative is going to help them understand this is reasonable. So you're not going to say, we're going to spend $20,000 on financial assistance and it's going to cover these cost categories and leave it at that. You're going to say it's going to cover childcare and we're going to provide 60 instances of childcare. So they're going to know it's reasonable, because then you're going to add a rate of. So you want to get specific in there so they can count it and say, well, geez, nobody's going to get $1,000 to do childcare for an hour. So always think about no flat numbers, you know, like just drop a number in and then just say, we're going to do this, this, and this without breaking it down. And then operating costs. This is an area that some folks forget, different kinds of things like that. And so when you think about supplies, I've seen people break it down, like we're going to buy this much toner, we're going to buy this many notepads and this many pens. I would say save yourself the headache. Don't do that. Who's going to count notebooks and pens and toner? So you want to think about it. Like for me, what I do is I break it down by a monthly cost. So I estimate how much I might be spending on supplies. And then I do it per FTE. So if I've got 1.25 FTE in the project, I'm going to take, if we have $150 that we spend per FTE at Redwind, then I'm going to take that $150 times 1.25 for my monthly rate for my supplies. And then I will say it will cover disposable supplies such as, and break that down, you know, with some examples, but, you know, such as means, you know, the fact that we ended up deciding we needed a wall clock and it wasn't in my budget, then I don't have to worry about it because I left it open and I can go out and buy that wall clock. So you don't want to get so rigid that you can't buy the supplies that you need. You know, you bought notebooks, pencils, and toner. Well, we needed staplers, you know, and then we needed staples for it, and we needed binder clips, and we needed folders. So make sure you don't get over detailed either. Such as is a really good term to use, and give some examples so they can see it. Staff development. So where I would include staff development, if I want them to go, like staff development, as I mentioned, travel to go to the sexual assault conference, or you know, some other conference or training, whether it's in state or out of state, I need to have it in my narrative that our staff need to be trained to strengthen their capacity. And then in my budget, I will put their travel costs in the staff travel. And then in the other cost category, there's an actual main section within OVW grants called other. In there, I put their registration fees. And I might, you know, depending on, you know, I might say for instance, in, like for us, it would be Indian nations, women are sacred, conference on crimes against women. But if I do, for instance, then I need to go get an OVW approval on it. If I say specifically it's going to be this conference, then when my budget's approved, I don't need to get another OVW approval. So there's some benefits on being real specific in some cases and other areas where you want to be a little bit broader. Make sure when you're doing your budgets, it fits the format provided. So OVW is using Just Grants. Other federal agencies within DOJ, Department of Justice, are using Just Grants. I was never doing percentages of wages, but Just Grants wants that. So I have built a format because I do my budget on a spreadsheet first, so that when I'm working in Just Grants, I can put it in there easier than trying to build it in there. And please don't do that because you'll make yourself miserable. Consider all project costs. So when you start brainstorming, create yourself some worksheets or a notebook with some notes in there, so you can double check yourself, because it is a lot of detail. So then as I've drafted my budget, I go back, I usually take a break, and then I come back maybe days or a week later and I review my budget, and I'll be like, oh, I forgot that. So I put that in and make adjustments and stuff. My notebooks also, I review any kind of worksheets or notes that I've made to make sure it's covered. And then I actually use a pink highlighter, because I usually don't use that for highlighting, which to me says it's done. So I'll draw a line through it to say it's in the budget. And then include your mandated costs for personnel, your fringe benefits, and leave times. And some people put it in their budgets and some people don't put leave time in their budget. So Redwind, we don't do that, but we're getting ready to do that. And we're kind of struggling on, the formatting and stuff like that. But if you're going to include your leave time, so if you get 3 weeks of vacation a year, if you're going to cost that out to your budget, you want to make sure that you've covered it and you've watched it, that information has the same costs for that employee. So you want to double, triple check your numbers. I actually use formulas and spreadsheets. And then before I knew how to do formulas, I always had like 2 other people put eyes on my budget and do a review. And, one, I want a finance person to look at that. And then the other is I want a program person to look at that. And then write out the basis for each calculation. So I just talked about that. Don't do a flat number. Make sure they understand how you arrived at that number and how many you're expecting. So the estimate that you're, the estimate that of the estimated numbers. And that's always so that you can, you're going to go a little over, maybe a little under. Yeah, I just said that about your fiscal officer, your treasurer. And then ask the funder how it deals with indirect costs. And I say that OVW allows you as an organization to do a 10% de minimis cost for costs that is too, it's not cost effective to calculate out. So such as we have our printer area where we call our workspace. All of our projects use that space. There is no way to know how much time is spent in that space. So we can't cover that in direct costs. So we cover that in our indirect through our de minimis. And the reason I say ask, because some foundations don't allow direct costs or indirect costs. Whenever you are allowed to, put your indirect costs in there. It will really help make sure all your costs are covered. And then don't pad your budget. So try to be as accurate as possible. So travel costs, you try to get a guess. I won't pad it. If the average cost of a plane ticket is $700, I won't say it's $900. I will try to stay in the $700. So when I say an average, I'm going to expect a few tickets to be 600, maybe 550, and then maybe a few tickets to be a little higher. You want to be close, reasonably close. Don't underestimate, but also don't way overestimate. And then don't fail to include strong justification for each line item. So that's the justification. Why do I need it? You know, why do I need to pay for meeting space? Why do I need to have cultural healing activities? You know, it's going to be a resource for victims that are in need of, you know, culturally specific healing activities. So you want to make sure not only are you providing the calculations, but you're helping them understand why you have it. And staffing needs, really, really, really think about your staffing needs. Think about what's realistic for this person. What's the scope? If you're working with survivors in the community, how many can they reasonably work with? You know, I was talking to somebody recently who worked with over 300 survivors in this year. And yes, they can do that, but was that quality work? We really want to err on the side of quality, not quantity. Because when you think about a survivor in crisis and giving them, you know, and doing quantity work with them and not quality work, we're basically barely skimming the surface of their needs. Don't deliberately under budget, really ask for what you need, be meaningful about your asks. And then don't write your budget until you have all available information about the size of grant awards. Really, there is nothing wrong with hitting the top limit. If they say they can award 500,000, ask for $500,000. If you work on that budget and you can't hit 500,000, well, then give up and don't keep trying to do that. You know, settle for 400,000, but don't cut yourself short and go for 150 or 200,000. Make sure you just really put in the resources that you need. Culturally specific advocacy is more complex than mainstream. I just want to say that because we have so many different challenges that our survivors need. Years ago, when I was the director of American Indian Community Housing Organization, I calculated our per unit cost and we started comparing it with other organizations in the community. Our per unit cost for serving a survivor was 3 times our mainstream organizations. And so it meant our staff was putting in 3 times the hours working with this one survivor. We have intersections of trauma, intersections of oppression that's playing out for our survivors. So the fact that the non-Native organization or the mainstream organization is serving 1,000 survivors in a year and you're only going to serve 80 in a year, that's not a big deal. Argue it. Stay firm with what you need. And then don't submit your budget without checking your math multiple times. I've had spreadsheets not add up until it's been saved and put away and reopened. So really, you know, if you don't rely on, you know, some other thing to make sure it's working. So double check it. If you've got someone else who's good at math, have them double check it for you. So let's do this. I really am excited and I really want to see more culturally specific organizations get funded, get stronger capacity on doing budgets. You've got the ability to do it. You can envision your dreams, your possibilities. You know, you can also do the budgeting part. If you can do basic math, it's not algebra, it's basic math. If you can do basic math, you can do it. It may take you longer in the beginning than after you've done it a few years. Like now, you know, here I've been doing it for a few decades and I can whip out a budget pretty fast, but I still do my double, triple checking to make sure. I still do my worksheets. I still do my notes to make sure I don't miss anything, because I don't want to have to go back and do a budget modification because it's a lot of extra work. So I'd rather do a little bit of extra work on the front end to make sure I've got everything I need. So I just want to see if anybody's got any kind of questions. or comments or thoughts you'd like to share. And as people are thinking, I see that Geisha put in, thank you for all coming today, and that there's on Thursday, there's a walkthrough of the culturally specific services program solicitation, and the link is in there. So definitely check that out and do that walkthrough, because it may give you ideas of things to put into your project if you're applying for it. Yeah, definitely. Yes, Erica.
Thank you. This was very helpful. I have pages of notes. Uh, one of the questions that I have is about indirect costs. Can you give a little bit more clarity to that word? I recently wrote a grant and I thought I was including indirect costs into a bucket for operational costs. But then when the budget review came, I had to give very, very specific information, line items with the exact cost, but that didn't leave any room for what I thought was indirect costs. Like you said, oh, now I realize I need staplers and staples because I was forced to line item every dollar and what I put in operations. So is operations separate from an indirect cost line?
A little bit, maybe. It's going to be vague. So the 10% de minimis indirect was something that came about just a few years ago. And because if you've got an approved indirect cost rate, you're doing a much bigger application and your rate's going to be a little bit higher. The de minimis has allowed for organizations to use the 10% to catch things that are higher to calculate. So we do like our audits in there, train our financial staff through there. We just had an all staff meeting. We've got 5 staff in different states, and we brought everybody into Colorado Springs and did an all staff meeting so we could pay the travel for that staff meeting. That was like kind of long range planning for the organization. Not strategic planning, but long range planning. So we did that. And then we have our common spaces in our office. So my office, most of my work is direct cost work. But we are also wrapping up an Office of the Inspector General audit right now. And so the work on the OIG that I'm doing is indirect because we can't cost it to any particular grant. So my cost, like my actual rate for my wages, I have a small portion of my wages costed into indirect costs, and then the rest are direct. And then the same thing like with our financial manager, there's some aspects of his work that are direct costs. And so his is kind of reverse of mine. He has a smaller amount that's direct, I think maybe 40% of his costs are direct costs, and then the rest are indirect. Running to pick up the mail, that's indirect cost. We don't know what's in that mailbox, so we can't cost it to any grant. So you want to think about it as what is hard to cost to any grant. It's a burden for you organizationally to cost it to any specific grant, and then charge it under your indirect. So the first time we got the de minimis back in 2017, I had to do what you're saying, Erica. So OVW asked me to create a budget of my indirect. So I tried to think about not only are the things that we're currently doing, but what are some of the other things? Like our board of directors, we're going to bring them in for an on-site, like an annual meeting. And we've got travel money in our indirect costs for our board of directors to come in and do an annual in-person meeting because they're a national board also. And then other kinds of things. So like, our bookkeeping costs for our software, our computer for that bookkeeping system, the furnishings in that office. And a large portion of that office, the work is indirect. So we cost that all, you know, most of that office space to indirect. And then also the equipment that's used in there, telephone, printer. We have small, like a few of us have small, like I have a little printer under my desk, and then we use our larger printer with bigger runs. Yeah, so, and then insurances. So like you might like, oh, we have our contractor, the person who does our 990 filing for the IRS. She does our 990, and then now we're hiring her to do quarterly financial reviews for us. So she's in our indirect also. And then we, you know, yeah. Anyway, you're getting the idea, I think. Cool. Are there any other questions? Well, great, everybody. Thank you all for hanging in here, and definitely, you know, if there's anything I can do to help, I would be willing to review a budget and offer feedback. I was saying, I've been reviewing a lot of budgets lately, but that's not, hopefully that's not going to be my norm. But I'm willing to review a budget, and I have done that with different programs, and particularly culturally specific organizations. I love helping and supporting us build our capacity, because I know I didn't get to where I am today without other people doing similar for me. So if there's any way I can help you, please feel free to get a hold of me. I don't think I even put my contact information. Oh, so a follow-up email will go out. Can you send my email address out also? That'd be awesome. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.